the topic is basically the psychology of waiting or waiting in line. This is actually the inspiration for the podcast because if you listened last week, Mick and I had this conversation via Instagram where we basically said, wouldn't it like this whole waiting in line thing now is a new norm in North America and Canada. Wouldn't it be great if we could do a podcast to help people, while they're standing in line to listen to something interesting, something different, something unique? So that was basically the inspiration of it. Now, I will admit, when I, told this to Mick, I'm like, this is a great idea. I had not actually done any kind of research on the psychology of waiting in line. If you haven't heard of this, it's a famous 1985 study written by Davis Mazer, and I apologize if I don't pronounce that correctly, and it's called The Psychology of Waiting Lines. And what it really comes out of, it comes out of basically how businesses can ensure that the waiting in line for consumers for goods and services is done in a most, the friendliest, best customer service kind of aspect. So a lot of what is written about waiting is completely written from the point of view of the capitalist kind of consumer-driven culture. So I think that's really interesting because I would have loved to be able to find studies on this that are not about us waiting to buy something and consume something, right? So a lot of what basically this kind of study really goes into is make your lines shorter, make them better, have, blah, blah, blah. So the key thing that you really get out of this is that the perception of the key thing about waiting in line is it's about expectation and perception. So if you expect to be in a line for 2 minutes, but you are in line for 10, that is basically going to give you a negative experience. And then the perception of how long you're waiting is also based upon the expectation. So sometimes when you're waiting in line for 2 minutes, it can seem like 2 hours versus when you're 10 minutes and it actually feels like 5. Why? Right? So I'm not going to go too much into why the actual retail experience and services does this, because what I actually found, how they actually adapt to this, what I found more interesting in this study is the 8 factors that make a wait feel longer or worse. And this is completely applicable to waiting in line for anything, even something like hospitals, right? Like going to the ER is painful, right? It's painful. But again, so 8 factors are occupied time feels shorter than unoccupied time. So, that's why a lot of us right now, we have this big entertainment thing in our pockets at any time when we're waiting in line, right? So you can just whip out your phone, call a friend, watch a Netflix show, listen to a podcast like ours. So again, if you have nothing to do while you're waiting, it feels longer. People want to get started. So this is big, right? It's kind of like you want to start the thing you're here to do, and you can't because you're waiting to do it. Anxiety, and then third one, anxiety makes wait times longer. So this is a big one. We're going to kind of talk about that a little bit later. So one thing I found is interesting that is actually very relevant to me. It's the anxiety is the idea of choosing the longer line or you chose the wrong line. I, before this, used to always say I'm terrible at choosing the checkout lines in any store because I always choose the one that's the longest. And then 4, uncertain waits are longer than known finite waits, right? So we've got some stuff to talk about that. 5, unexplained waits are longer than explained waits. So when you get stuck on the Gardner, trying to get to work, some of us, that was a reality for us, and you have no idea why you're stuck. It's, you're like, we're just going to be here forever. 6 is unfair waits are longer than equitable waits. Now, this is also, again, comes back to perception and reality, perception and expectation, because it's your perception of what you feel is fair. But also this is why people hate it when people jump in line. 7, the more valuable the service, the longer the customer will wait. So again, you can see this whole kind of it's all about the customer. And then 8, solo waits feel longer than group waits, which, let's talk about this thing a little bit. Because I think it's really relevant to right now. We have to social distance, so we're not supposed to be waiting in groups of line. But those are the 8 kind of principles.
One of the main highways or intersections to get out of Toronto, it's the Gardiner. So traffic. When you live in a city like downtown Toronto or Manhattan or any other place where there's like a big concentration of people and cars. Like I was like, for example, Bangkok. Like Bangkok is like mind-blowing how like easily 2 hours and a half in a like space of 3 kilometers, right? So that's why people like are in their scooters a lot because they can just avoid the traffic. But one of the things that caught my attention from all those 8 points is definitely when you said that idea that everyone has is like, did I do the best choice to go on this line as in supposed to the next one? Because it's like the what were called those Murphy's law, that your line when you're in traffic, it's always going to be the one that moves the slowest. And I have a theory on why that is. Do you know, like, have you thought about that, Kinga? Like, why do you think, like, people think of, like, oh, and this is my theory, okay? So everyone who's, like, right now on Facebook or on Instagram, you can also give your opinion. My theory is that we feel, like that Murphy's Law, we feel that our line, when we're in traffic, is the slowest because we don't notice when we're going fast. We don't care, right? Let's say that you're in line A and the line B, right? So line A is moving freely. Line B, you don't care about line B, right? However, people in line B care about line A because they have nothing else to do. They have to wait for the car ahead. What do you think? What do you think of that theory that I have?
Well, it's the classic the grass is greener on someone else's lawn theory, right? It's like you think someone else has it better than you because it appears better, and they're looking at you and they're like, they probably have it better than me. So yeah, it comes to that whole perception thing that I mentioned in that study, right? It's the perception of that line going faster, right? Because you're kind of, when you're waiting in line, one of the things that I wanted to cover later on is like you're basically stuck in it. You're kind of like in the moment, right here, right now, with nothing to do. So it's like you have empty time, and that kind of makes it harder for us to patiently wait.
Good. All right. So one of the things that I wanted with technology is that, yes, we're going solo now, right? Like in the sense that you have to get the 2 meters or the 2 arms length while waiting in the line. But where is the human and social aspect, right? Like we talked about it last week in the first episode, that it's just the survival of humanity and society is always trying to, like, we're not islands, right? We can't be that way, but now we're just sort of like restrained to do so. My idea of that technology and channels like W8time and other options for you to get entertained is, yes, you sometimes you want your alone time, but there's also the counterpart. And what if I want to interact? What if I am lonely, or if I live by myself and my going out to the grocery store is the only moment where I actually see people? So one of the things that I want to propose, and this is for everyone online, is that yes, take your time. Everyone is in their different levels, but also, what if you also make the effort to interact if you feel like? And if you're in line, maybe ask, excuse me, to the person ahead and say, excuse me, how long you've been waiting? Something like that, right? And then you reassess. You say like, oh, maybe that person is also in the same situation, that I only have 2 cats and live by myself. Or the situation of like, okay, I want to interact, and from a safe distance, I think it's all right. What do you think? Like, would you find that okay, Kinga?
Well, it's interesting because Toronto has this reputation in Torontonians for being very standoffish and cold, right? But it's actually not true. It's we live in a large city, and if you choose to live in a large city, it's because you kind of want to have the you want to be anonymous, right? Which you can't have in a small town. Like wherever you go in a small town, they know you, they've known your whole family, and by the time you get back to home, like your mother knows where you went, so large city living is about the freedom to be anonymous, but I also find that if you actually strike up a conversation with Torontonians, they can be extremely friendly and engaging, and just awesome. Like before, like when this whole thing started, I remember what is it, the great toilet paper panic of 2020, that first weekend. I actually found some toilet paper because I actually needed it. Like I was like down to my last roll, and my mom works down the street from me, and she found some toilet paper. So on my way home, I had this like nice 12-pack of toilet paper, and just engaged in some of the most interesting conversations with these two ladies on the streetcar, because they're like, "Where did you find that?" And I'm like, "Oh, here, just found it at a local convenience store." We started chatting about the whole pandemic and what's happening. Like this one was a teacher, and then like we had a nurse come on at another stop, look at my toilet paper. We had this whole like 3-pronged conversation, which isn't normal, but it was nice. So I think, I agree with you, Mick. Like by all means, if you're standing in that line and there's someone in front of you or behind you that like looks like they're giving you cues that they would be open to a conversation, go for it. I mean, there was this whole.
Well, you can even hook up. No.
Well.
Anyone. Find your new husband.
Yeah. I mean,
wife.
People are doing that. They're doing a whole like I don't remember where I heard it on some podcast that people are now like when they're dating, they're vetting each other first. They're like, how much contact have you had with who, what, whatever, and if we do this, then we're like boyfriend and girlfriend during this whole thing, right? So yeah, it's pretty funny.
I mean, you can have virtual boyfriends now.
Yeah.
Or girlfriends. Right?
Yeah, like, you can. But, that's a lot of work for a virtual boyfriend. You might as well just like talk to Netflix.
Talking a little bit about technology, I wanted to explore with you, Kinga, about the progress bar concept.
So,
what do you know about it?
Before we get into that, the one thing I wanted to reference back is to the study that we were talking about earlier, the psychology of waiting lines. It was updated in 2008 by Donald Arthur. So he basically took Davis Meyer's initial study and updated it to talk about the digital world and how waiting in line is no longer just a physical thing you do. It's also something you do in the virtual world, right? And basically his update speaks to user experience design methodology, right? So like how you're supposed to design, like websites and apps and whatnot to kind of have that, to make the experience of waiting in line better for people. And, Mick and I, we had a conversation about this off the podcast, but I did know about the creation of the progress bar. So like Domino's is a great example. Like if you order Domino's, they'll have that super awesome graphic that tells you how your pizza's doing. You'll have it when you, for example, have to download an update to your computer, which everybody hates, right? And when you when you're buying a ticket or anything online, like that little progress bar that tells you how long you've got going on. So like that's the biggest thing that kind of came out of like the digital world in terms of like making the waiting experience better and making it better for people, because as we've moved online, people expect something to be like snap. I want it now.
If you know what's happening behind the scenes, what are the efforts that the staff, the heroes, the essential heroes, why are they taking that time to do it? Like if we have, let's say, a camera inside the store, and then you can see it from your phone and say, oh, I know that now they're sanitizing And that's why it's taking these 5 minutes or 10 minutes more. And that's a little bit of the idea, right? As long as you know what's happening behind the scenes, but as you mentioned it earlier in the 8 principles of the weight psychology, is that the unexpected or the unknown weight is what definitely it's what makes it feel like an eternity.
I would actually love to see a study after this COVID-19 to see how the study would be updated, right? Because like a store's layout is crafted. It takes a long time. I obviously know people that work in retail marketing, so I've read some stuff in terms of about like what goes into like designing a store layout, and why is the fresh food here and this is in this section, this is in this. Guys, it is an art and science. Like there's billions of dollars spent to learn how you can design a store layout to get people to buy the most things. And now we're kind of like in this strange new world, right? Where we're going to see changes, because I don't believe we're going to go back to everything's open right away. Everyone goes in. No, we're going to maintain the sanitation, social distancing efforts in retail for at least until the end of the year, if not longer, right? So how are stores going to adapt to this? How is the science of retail marketing going to adapt to this? Because right now, the number one goal used to be sell the most. Now it's keep people safe and your staff safe and make sure that, we don't get sick. So how are they going to do that? Like we already seen them adapting quite well. There's usually like a little sanitation station. They try to do, you see the footprints that tell you, hey, stand here in line. The aisles are one way, and etc. So it's interesting to see how we're going to see that changed. So looking forward to it.
It's going to be amazing what's going to happen next. And you know what's my favorite part of all this? Our generation, Kinga, have lived through something like this, right? I think that we're going to be the ones in the future that want to say like to our futures grandchildren or the younger generation. It's like, in my time when there was the pandemic, right? And we're gonna sound like so old, but it's just fascinating that now our generation is going through this. And of course it's gonna make us stronger. It's gonna make us also resilient for sure, and it's gonna change the world. So
how has your feelings of waiting in line changed? Okay, I used to hate waiting in line. I hated it. I think it comes from because I was raised in communism in the 80s, so I don't really have like full memories of waiting in lines for hours, but my mother does, and she tells us the stories all the time. So I think it kind of just picked up that sort of hatred for waiting in line. But I used to hate it, but now I actually don't mind it because I know there's a reason for it, and it's just what you do, right? Like you have to wait in line. So if you want to have groceries, you want to have some, alcohol beverages or anything, you're going to have to wait in line. So it's like, whatever. I just adapted. That's it. So I don't hate them. So we did get an answer. So Clara says, initially it was wild, felt like a spy movie. Now it's become the new normal. So again, and then Artful Vandalays. I scoped out places that don't have lines. LCBO at Lawrence and Port Union's where it's at. And then my mom, I have an idea. When you're bored waiting in line, call your mother. There you go, everybody. Coming from my mother, a gentle reminder that I haven't called her in a while, that I should really call her next time I stand in line. Got it, Mom.
Pre-COVID, remember that we have busy lives, and especially if you're living in the urban areas or city life, right? Like you're just like in and out, supermarket in and out. Like you didn't have that time to pause or to meditate or to do that breathing exercise or to actually call your mother.
Yes.
So now you have that. So let's get the most out of it.
One of the biggest stressors of waiting in line is the anxiety you feel along with it, right? What makes you feel anxious about waiting? So I think, I think this concept is pretty well known. It's, why do we feel anxious standing in line, right? You don't know how long you're waiting for. You feel you shouldn't have to wait this long. You have nothing to occupy your time with. Maybe you're anxious because you think you're going to run late for something or whatnot. So this is all kind of normal anxiety about or maybe you think you're going to miss it, right? So if you're, for example, trying to book a flight online or an Airbnb back in the day, and you're like, oh no, what if and you see the little progress bar doing its work, going. You're like, oh my God, what if I'm going to miss that deal, right? So there's all this kind of anxiety that comes with thinking you might not get something or get it done in time, right? So again, this is all, and what I kind of really find interesting about the concept of waiting in line is that some of the anxiety comes from not having to do anything, right? So I read this great article from Psychology Today, and was written by Mark Whitman, PhD, and he did this whole study, and he calls the concept of like enduring empty time and how we don't deal with that very well, right? I mean, we do have this phone in our pocket, which gives us access to everything. But I feel as if now in this time when we're waiting in line to shop for necessities, it's more, we kind of get more of this sense of I'm enduring empty time right now because we're not used to it. And it's all tied within kind of like a larger kind of anxiety inducing situation, right? So, and that's kind of was the inspiration for this podcast actually, was to like give people something to do when they're enduring empty time. Because I know, Mick, we were talking about this earlier when you were saying that, we as a society aren't used to not doing anything, right? We're busy, always going, and this whole pandemic has kind of made us pause. So I think sometimes we almost enjoy enduring the empty time of waiting in line, waiting to do something. Like I actually personally have had moments like that when I have to do my big grocery run in the week because I don't have a car. I live in a city, I need to go once a week for myself. And I go to Metro and I'm like, I'm going to go stand in line. And I just stand in line. Sometimes I don't even listen to a podcast. I'll just look around, stare at things. I'm literally enduring empty time and kind of enjoying it, right? Whereas in the past, I would have been super anxious about it. So like, what about you? Like, have you had this kind of like, this enduring empty time concept?
The reality, Kinga, is that we are getting used to the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that everyone is now accepting, right? I read an article from Business Insider about 2 months ago when they were saying that there's different levels also of grief in this situation, because definitely is something sad what's happening, right? And same like the grief, right? Like first is denial, then it's a little bit of the acceptance, and then how do you, I think that most of the world by now, although there are some parts that are not, but most of the world have just already accepted the situation, and they are in that transforming idea of what's going to happen. So for me, like the most shocking part of like having to wait is seeing someone behind me too close to me. And I think that a lot of people have also mentioned that, and even just by reflex. This happened 2 days ago. I went to my pharmacy/grocery store nearby, and I was just getting the sanitizers when I enter, and then I asked to the security staff. By the way, security staff, we love you. Like, you are amazing. Right now, we've seen more and more the security staff. Like, you are doing an amazing job, sometimes or overlooked, but we really see that you are sacrificing also your health for us. So thank you to all the security staff. So I was asking, right, and like pretty much like, because now it's just my normal now, I was like, oh yeah, so I want to ask you something, and then I saw that the security lady took a step back, and I was like, oh, sorry, because I was unconsciously too close to her.
Yeah.
And that was like, because she's like completely forgot that we were doing this, right? Even though she was wearing one of those riot gears
Yeah.
that you see, and like with gloves and everything, but because now it's so normal to me, like I was just like trying to like ask her that question, and I remember that struck me, because I said, wow, yeah, it's very interesting now that people are just as well, like, like seeing. I have a principle that I will recommend everyone who's listening, and that is when I'm, especially because if you live in the city, in the urban area where there's a lot of people around you, it's always to do the 360 degrees check. And that is, if you are in a subway platform or on a crowded place, always do a 360 check to know like what's happening in your surrounding, right?
Yep.
It's always big part of like being present type of concept, and knowing your surroundings. So that's definitely the mental health aspect. That there's applications that we're
Yep.
gonna recommend actually after this podcast, on what to do, breathing exercises, so you can relax and do not feel anxious
Yeah.
during your wait time. So tell me, what is a positive wait experience for you?
As a person that hates go standing in line, the things I would stand in line for. So one of my favorite memories was when the band Garbage. I don't know if you know them from the 90s. I love them. I have all their CDs, guys. I still do to this day. They had a new book that came out, and they were doing a signing at Type Bookstore on Queen Street. So I stood in line. I went off, got myself a free Eventbrite ticket, and I stood in that line for like an hour or whatever. Actually, I don't even remember how long the line is, but like I loved standing in that line because I got to interact with other Garbage fans, and we all just chatted and talked and whatnot. And I got to meet them, and I got to tell Shirley Manson how awesome she was, and I got a signed book. So I like standing in line. That
You reminded me of the when people are on the iPhone waiting for the iPhone, right? Like sometimes they do the tents, right? So that's an
yes,
exciting one. But the one that I wanted to
yeah,
contribute was when you are the night before, you have a big vacation travel, right? So that
yes.
way, like for me, even going to the airport is such an experience that I just definitely get so excited, and that's a positive weight.
But so I always show up early, 3 hours at the airport. This is international travel, obviously, and I just like to be there. I want to be past security. I want to sit at the bar, have a beer, do something, and just wait. I love that wait. So I don't mind going to the airport 3 hours early to wait because I know I'm going to get there.
Kinga, thank you very much, and everyone who joined in. Next Saturday, we're gonna have another exciting topic. Till next
Yes.
time.